On the rugged frontier of British India, at the edge of the unforgiving Hindu Kush Mountains, a tiny outpost became the stage for one of the most extraordinary last stands in military history. On September 12, 1897, just 21 Sikh soldiers of the 36th Sikh Regiment stood their ground against an onslaught of thousands of Afghan tribesmen. Cut off, outnumbered, and with no hope of relief, these men of steel fought with unwavering courage until their last breath. The Battle of Saragarhi has often been called India's Thermopylae, and rightly so. Like the 300 Spartans at the Hot Gates, these Sikh warriors did not fight for survival, but for duty, honor, and brotherhood. Each knew that death was inevitable, yet none faltered. Their sacrifice delayed the enemy, bought critical time for nearby forts, and carved their names into history as eternal symbols of valor. This is their story. The story of Saragarhi, where 21 stood against 10,000. To understand the Battle of Saragarhi, one must first look at the land where it was fought. The northwest frontier province, today's Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, Pakistan. This region, a rugged expanse of mountains and valleys, had long been a battleground for empires. Persians, Greeks, Mughals, Afghans, and finally the British. It was a land where tribal independence was fiercely guarded, and any foreign army was seen as an invader. By the late 19th century, the British Empire controlled vast parts of India, but struggled to keep order along this volatile frontier. The Pashtun tribes, proud and warlike, resisted foreign domination with relentless raids and uprisings. The British answer was to build a network of forts and outposts to monitor movement and suppress rebellion. Among these were Fort Lockhart and Fort Gulistan, perched on opposite ends of a rocky ridge. Between them stood a smaller post, Saragarhi, a signaling station equipped with a heliograph, a device that flashed sunlight across distances to send messages. Though modest in size and manned by only 21 soldiers, Saragarhi was vital. Without it, the two forts could not communicate, leaving them isolated and vulnerable. Thus, when rebellion flared in September 1897, Saragarhi became the unlikely heart of a storm. The 36th Sikh Regiment of the British Indian Army, to which the defenders of Saragarhi belonged, was no ordinary unit. Raised in 1887, the regiment was composed entirely of Sikh soldiers, chosen for their martial reputation, loyalty, and iron discipline. For the Sikhs, soldiering was not merely a profession, it was part of their Khalsa identity, a sacred duty rooted in the teachings of Guru Gobind Singh, who had declared that every Sikh must be both a saint and a soldier. In early September 1897, the frontier boiled with unrest. Rumors spread that Afghan tribes numbering in the thousands were preparing to strike at British positions along the Samana Ridge. Their targets were the line of forts that guarded the approaches to the Kohat Pass. At Fort Lockhart, the commanding officer, Colonel Horton, kept a wary eye on the horizon. His men could see distant fires flickering in the hills at night, the signal of tribes gathering for war. In Fort Gulistan, some kilometers away, the garrison braced for attack. And in between, at Saragarhi, just 21 soldiers under Havildar Ishar Singh held the line. For them, this was not unusual. Life at Saragarhi was lonely and monotonous. The small post consisted of little more than stone walls, a watchtower, and a signaling device. Yet those who served there carried the same pride as if they were defending a fortress. The Sikh soldiers maintained their routines, prayers at dawn, drills, cleaning rifles, and manning the heliograph. Still, the sense of impending danger weighed on them. Scouts reported large gatherings of tribesmen in the Orakzai hills. Small skirmishes had already broken out. The Sikhs knew what was coming. On the morning of September 12, 1897, as the sun rose over the barren hills, lookouts at Saragarhi spotted movement in the distance. Soon a sea of tribal warriors, thousands strong, came into view, converging on the small outpost. The defenders exchanged glances. Each knew this could be his last day, yet there was no fear in their eyes, only the calm resolve of men ready to stand together no matter the odds. The storm had arrived. The dust of the advancing horde rose like a storm cloud, blotting out the morning light. From the walls of Saragarhi, The 21 Sikhs of the 36th Regiment watched as the Afghan and Orakzai tribes descended upon them in waves. Estimates of their numbers ranged from 8,000 to 12,000, some accounts even more. They carried rifles, swords, spears and banners, their war cries echoing across the barren ridge. At their head stood tribal chieftains, furious at the presence of foreign forts in their ancestral lands. For them, Saragarhi was a stepping stone. Destroy it, and they could cut communications, overrun Fort Gulistan, and then bring down Fort Lockhart. The small outpost, seemingly insignificant, was in fact the keystone of the frontier defense. Inside the post, Havildar Ishar Singh, the veteran commander, gathered his men. A heliograph message was sent to Colonel Horton at Fort Lockhart. Enemy approaching the Saragarhi post. Numbers very large, we are preparing for the defense. The reply was grim but resolute. Hold the position at all costs. Reinforcements cannot arrive in time. The men nodded. There would be no retreat, no relief. The responsibility of holding the ridge fell upon them alone. With a thunderous roar, the tribesmen launched their opening assault. Hundreds charged across the rocky ground, bullets whizzing as they fired wildly at the fort's defenders. But the Sikh rifles, Lee Enfield repeaters, spoke with deadly precision. Every shot counted. Warriors fell in heaps at the base of the walls, their advance broken by disciplined volleys. For hours the Sikhs repelled assault after assault. Each time the enemy regrouped, reformed and surged again, only to be driven back by the unyielding defenders. But numbers told. Saragarhi's walls shook under the relentless barrage of musket fire and the pounding of axes and hammers. The attackers sought to burn the gates, climb the walls, and force their way inside. Yet each breach was met by the flash of bayonets, the crash of rifle butts and the roar of defiance from the Sikhs. Inside, the air grew thick with smoke and dust. Supplies were limited, ammunition precious. Still, the soldiers fought as though they had endless reserves. Messages continued to flash by heliograph to Fort Lockhart. Each report grew more desperate, yet each carried the same iron will. We fight on. Enemy cannot break us. As the sun rose higher, the situation grew dire. The Afghans, frustrated at their losses, swarmed around the fort in greater numbers, probing for weaknesses. And within Saragarhi's walls, 21 men prepared for the greatest test of their lives. The siege of Saragarhi had truly begun. The blazing midday sun bore down upon the ridge as the defenders of Saragarhi faced the relentless tide of warriors. Hours of combat had transformed the rocky outpost into a smoking battlefield. The stone walls were cracked, the gate charred, and the air thick with the acrid stench of gunpowder. Still, the 21 Sikhs under Havildar Ishar Singh held their ground. The Afghan tribes, humiliated by repeated failed charges, shifted tactics. Using dry brushwood and timber, they piled fuel at the base of the gate and set it alight. Smoke billowed upward, choking the defenders at the parapets. Sparks caught, flames licked higher, and soon the great wooden gate groaned under the heat. The Sikhs fired into the smoke, their bullets striking unseen foes, but the inevitable loomed. The enemy would break through. Inside the fort, Ishar Singh barked orders with the steady calm of a seasoned veteran. "Hold your fire until you see them clearly," he commanded. His men, soot-streaked and weary, nodded silently. They knew the moment of close combat was near. At last, with a thunderous crack, part of the gate collapsed. A surge of tribesmen poured through the breach, weapons raised high. The Sikhs answered not with fear but with fury. From the walls, rifles cracked. At the gate itself, defenders met the charge head-on with bayonets and swords. The small courtyard erupted into chaos. Steel on steel, cries of pain and the roar of battle. Ishar Singh himself led the counterattack, his khanda blade flashing in the sunlight. Each swing felled an opponent, each movement driving back the tide for a few precious moments. The Afghans reeled under the ferocity of the Sikh defense, astonished that so few men could unleash such wrath. One by one the defenders fell, but never without taking many foes with them. Sepoy Bhagwan Singh fought atop the wall until he was cut down by musket fire. Lance Naik Chanda Singh stood his ground at the breach, bayonet flashing, until he was overwhelmed. Each man fought until surrounded, refusing to retreat, refusing to yield. Inside the fort, Sepoy Gurmukh Singh continued to flash desperate messages with the heliograph to Fort Lockhart, even as the enemy swarmed around him. His final signal, as smoke consumed the fort, was a single line of defiance. "We have fought to the last man and are still holding on." The defenders, bloodied and battered, stood unbroken in spirit. Even as their ammunition ran out, they seized their kirpans, rifle butts and bare fists. Every inch of Saragarhi was soaked with sacrifice. The sun began to dip toward the horizon, its light falling upon a scene of devastation. The small post was overrun, its walls breached, its defenders fallen, but not conquered. Each Sikh had fought until death, their valor blazing like a beacon across the frontier. The day had turned to fire and blood, but in their sacrifice, the men of Saragarhi had carved immortality. As the sun dipped low over the rugged hills of the northwest frontier, Saragarhi fort lay in flames. The gate had been smashed, the walls battered, and the courtyard was a storm of dust, smoke, and blood. The cries of thousands of Afghan tribesmen filled the air, mingled with the defiant shouts of the few Sikh defenders still standing. Havildar Ishar Singh, bloodied from countless wounds, realized the moment had come. His men were falling one by one. The courtyard was strewn with bodies, both friend and foe. With a roar that seemed to shake the earth itself, he ordered the remaining Sikhs to follow him in a final countercharge. Sword in hand, he leapt forward into the mass of Afghans pouring through the breach. His men followed without hesitation. For a fleeting moment, the attackers recoiled under the sheer ferocity of the assault. Ishar Singh cut down foe after foe, his khanda dripping with blood, before finally being struck down in a storm of blades. Yet even as he fell, he became the living embodiment of the Sikh spirit, fearless, unyielding, eternal. With their commander gone, the surviving Sikhs fought in scattered knots, each man making his own last stand. Bayonets thrust, rifle butts swung and kirpans slashed until the very end. None begged for mercy, none surrendered. Each death was a message: we will not yield. The attackers, stunned by such resistance, suffered grievous losses at the hands of warriors who had already accepted death. What should have been a swift conquest turned into an ordeal of attrition, costing the Afghans hundreds of lives. Only one man remained, Sepoy Gurmukh Singh, the heliograph operator, barely 20 years old. Throughout the battle, he had flashed updates to Fort Lockhart, the waves of attacks, the fall of comrades, the breach of the walls. Now, alone amid the dead, he sent his final message. "The enemy is inside. I will continue to fight to the last man and the last round." Laying aside the heliograph, he seized his rifle and climbed atop the roof of the signaling room. Surrounded by flames and enemies, he fired round after round into the mob below. Witnesses later recalled that he killed over 20 attackers single-handedly. When his ammunition was spent, he is said to have drawn his bayonet and leapt into the fray. The Afghans, enraged but also awestruck, overwhelmed him. His last cry of "Jo Bole So Nihal Sat Shri Akal" echoed across the battlefield before he was cut down. At last, the fort was silent. Smoke drifted from the shattered walls. The 21 defenders of Saragarhi lay lifeless, but around them lay the bodies of hundreds of Afghan warriors who had paid dearly for their victory. The Afghans, victorious yet shaken, paused in awe of the tiny garrison's sacrifice. What they had faced was not merely soldiers, but lions who fought beyond fear, beyond hope, beyond death itself. In that silence, Saragarhi entered legend. When the guns fell silent at Saragarhi on December 12, 1897, word of the garrison's annihilation spread quickly across the rugged passes of the northwest frontier. The Afghans, though victorious, had suffered enormous losses. Some accounts estimate between 600 and 800 dead, with many more wounded. Their triumph was costly, and their progress stalled by the extraordinary resistance of only 21 men. At Fort Lockhart and Fort Gulistan, the Sikh and British garrisons had watched helplessly as the heliograph messages ceased. The realization that Saragarhi had fallen was heavy with grief. Yet, mingled with sorrow, was admiration. Those men had not merely defended a small outpost, they had rewritten the meaning of courage. News of the battle reached India and then London. where it captured headlines. For the British Empire, it was both a tragedy and a symbol of loyalty and valor. Here was a regiment of colonial soldiers standing against impossible odds and fulfilling their duty to the very end. For the Sikh community, however, it was something more profound. The defense of Saragarhi became a modern embodiment of the Sikh martial tradition, echoing the spirit of the Khalsa warriors who had, for centuries, stood firm against overwhelming odds. The names of the 21 defenders were read with reverence in Punjab villages. Families mourned but also celebrated, for their sons had not died in vain, but as martyrs in defense of honor. In recognition of their sacrifice, all 21 Sikh soldiers were posthumously awarded the Indian Order of Merit, the highest gallantry award available to Indian soldiers at the time, equivalent to the Victoria Cross. Never before, and never since, has an entire unit been collectively honored in this way. The British military establishment was so moved that memorial Gurdwaras Sikh temples were built at Amritsar and Firozpur to honor the fallen. Their names were engraved in stone, ensuring that their story would be remembered not only by soldiers, but by generations of Sikhs who would visit these shrines. What set Saragarhi apart from countless battles in history was not its scale or its strategic importance, but the unyielding will of its defenders. 21 men held off thousands for nearly an entire day, refusing to surrender, fighting to the last breath. For soldiers across the empire, Saragarhi became a tale to inspire discipline and bravery. For Sikhs, it became a sacred narrative of faith, sacrifice and honor, echoing the cry of Jo Bole So Nihal Sat Shri Akal that had been the last sound heard from the fort's walls. In military academies, both British and Indian, Saragarhi was studied as an example of morale, leadership, and the psychological impact of defiance against overwhelming force. Havildar Ishar Singh's leadership, Gurmukh Singh's final message, and the collective loyalty of the garrison became touchstones in discussions of duty and sacrifice. Even more, it became clear that Saragarhi was not a story of empire alone. It was a story of universal courage. The men had fought not just because they were ordered to, but because they embodied a code that placed honor above life itself. In later decades, military historians compared Saragarhi to other legendary last stands, the Spartans at Thermopylae, the Swiss Guard at the sack of Rome, or the Texans at the Alamo. Yet for many, Saragarhi stood apart, for it was not merely a Western tale of defiance, but a moment where Eastern warriors imprinted their valor upon the world stage. Today, Saragarhi is commemorated every year on September 12th, now recognized as Saragarhi Day by Sikh communities and the Indian Army. Regiments like the Sikh Regiment and the modern Indian Armed Forces remember it as a pinnacle of their heritage. The sun set on Saragarhi on the 12th of September 1897, but the flames kindled there never went out. Though the fort itself fell into ruin, the story of its defense became immortal, carried in the songs of villages, the reports of officers, and the prayers of Sikhs around the world. What had happened on that barren ridge was more than a skirmish. It was a testament to the human spirit. For the Sikh community, the battle reaffirmed the essence of the Khalsa warrior ethos, to fight against tyranny no matter the odds. The defenders of Saragarhi were not just soldiers of the British Indian Army, they were heirs to the spirit of Guru Gobind Singh's Khalsa, who had vowed to defend righteousness even when outnumbered 1,000 to 1. Their last cries of Sat Shri Akal became an eternal echo of Sikh bravery, joining the ranks of martyrs who had defended faith and freedom through centuries of struggle. The British, deeply moved by the valor of the 36th Sikh Regiment, ensured the fallen were never forgotten. 2 memorial Gurdwaras were constructed, one at Amritsar, the spiritual heart of Sikhism, and another at Firozpur, the regimental headquarters. These shrines became sacred spaces where the names of the 21 were etched into stone, transforming them from soldiers into symbols. In modern India, Saragarhi Day is commemorated every year on September 12th. Across Sikh regiments and communities, the story is retold, ensuring that the sacrifice continues to inspire new generations. The story of Saragarhi did not remain confined to Punjab or to India. British officers hailed it as one of the greatest last stands in military history. Winston Churchill himself reportedly called it an act of the greatest bravery. In 2017, the UK Parliament officially recognised the Battle of Saragarhi, highlighting the courage of the Sikh soldiers and their contribution to world history. Sikh communities in Britain, Canada and beyond have since kept the memory alive through education, public events and cultural initiatives. Historians often compare Saragarhi to Thermopylae, 480 BCE, where 300 Spartans held back a Persian horde, to Masada, 73 CE, where Jewish rebels resisted the Romans, to the Alamo, 1836, where Texian defenders stood against Santa Anna's army. Yet, Saragarhi holds a special place. Unlike many legendary last stands, Saragarhi is unique in that its soldiers were all decorated posthumously for gallantry. It is also one of the rare battles where the defenders' sacrifice directly inspired continued resistance in surrounding forts, preventing the Afghan advance from gaining momentum. At its heart, Saragarhi is not about empire or strategy or territory. It is about courage without hope of survival. It is about duty carried to its ultimate end. And it is about 21 men who, faced with overwhelming odds, chose not surrender but sacrifice. Their legacy lives on in the Sikh Regiment of the Indian Army, one of the most decorated units in modern military history. It lives on in the communities who honor them every September. And it lives on in the broader human story, a reminder that valor is measured not by numbers, but by resolve. The ruins of Saragarhi still stand on that rocky ridge, silent witnesses to a battle that shaped memory more than maps. Wind and dust have claimed the stones, but not the story. For as long as tales of bravery are told, the 21st at Saragarhi will stand alongside the greatest warriors of history, not as victims, but as victors of the spirit. The Battle of Saragarhi remains one of the most extraordinary examples of loyalty, sacrifice and valor in human history, a reminder that even in the face of certain death, courage can echo through eternity.